I don't know what it is about the cold night air that I love so much. Maybe it's because it's the only thing that seems to soothe me. I was only 8 years old when my mom began abusing my dad. I know a lot of people will say that he should have just stood up to her and that he's a man and he could have defended himself. But truth be told, he was so in love with my mother, even in her drunken state, that he would rather let her beat him than ever lay a hand on her. Every time my mom got in that altered state, my dad would tell me to go take a walk. It was usually at night, and I began to like the quiet, the darkness, and it became my safe place. It was almost like it was the only time I could feel safe and alone, Like no one could ever hurt me. I think about how for most people, night and darkness has the opposite effect. Most people feel vulnerable and scared, but not me. And that was until one night, and one woman, who stole that from me forever. I was 17 and my mom had just passed away. My dad took it really hard. He may have been in a physically and emotionally abusive relationship with her for 20 years, but there was nothing she could do that would ever make him stop loving her. She never laid a hand on me, so that was never something my dad had to deal with. We had just had her funeral the week before this incident, and as much as I wish I could say her death made me sad, it just didn't. I felt such intense, extreme relief. Not so much for me, but for my dad. Even if he couldn't see the damage and heartbreak she caused him, I could, and I was glad that it was over. It was a Wednesday night, and I was taking a walk around our neighborhood. I needed some time to think, time to try and rid myself of the guilt of being glad my own mother had died. But the guilt stayed. No matter how much I tried to push it out of my mind, it was there, and something in me finally realized that there was no changing that. I had walked probably somewhere along the line of 10 miles. I'd been out for hours and it was getting pretty late. Or early, it just depends on how you look at it. It was around 3 in the morning and I was pretty tired by that point. The 10 miles that I'd walked was mostly in a circle around my house, given it was a pretty large circle, but I was grateful that I was only about a mile from home. If I walked fast, I could get back in around 25 minutes. Of course, we didn't live in the safest of neighborhoods. We were on the poorer side, but we managed the best we could. I was walking around for 10 minutes when I passed by the abandoned Mexican restaurant on the corner of the road. It had closed around 10 years prior due to not being up to code, and the plants had grown around it. Most of the windows were broken in, and there was a rumor that a bunch of squatters lived inside, but I never saw any, and it didn't matter to me either way. I was just going to mind my own business, and if there were people in there and I ever saw them, I just looked the other way anyways. Well, looking the other way didn't exactly work, you see. As I watched as a woman crawled out of one of the windows of the restaurant. I have no issue telling it like it is when it comes to her because of what she did to me, and she looked absolutely disgusting. Her face and clothes were covered in dirt and muck, and even though I was only 20 feet away, I swear that I was able to smell her stench from where I was standing. She smelled like she'd been wandering through the city's sewage tunnels all night. But I looked the other way and continued walking. Around 5 minutes later, I smelled that stench again. Only this time I could tell that it was much closer. I immediately turned around, and there she was, standing directly behind me, so close that I began to gag. I don't think she appreciated that very much as she pulled out a knife and pressed it to my stomach. The gagging that had been uncontrollable until then suddenly stopped, and I felt the tip of the knife pierce my skin. I looked down at the knife and my mind went blank. My life had sucked until then, but I didn't want to die. I looked up into her eyes and just found nothing. No sympathy, no remorse for what she was doing. There was nothing there. I did notice, however, that her face was covered in sores and wounds. She didn't speak, and her face twitched, and she moved in a way that made it obvious that she was on some kind of drug, or maybe many drugs. She kept the knife pressed to my stomach as I asked her what she wanted, and again she said nothing. She used her other hand to pat my jean pockets and felt my wallet. She grabbed it and pulled it out, putting it in her own pocket. Then she pointed at the watch that I was wearing, and I took it off and handed it to her. Funny thing is that my wallet had no credit cards and no money, and my watch was worth maybe $10 at the most, but I wasn't going to tell her that. I thought since she had everything she wanted that would be the end of it, but it wasn't. It was only going to get worse from there. She forced me to walk behind the building and began to touch me in ways that I didn't want to be touched. I tried to resist, but every time I did, she pressed the knife further into my skin until I finally gave up. I laid there as I let her do whatever she wanted to me, and when she was done, she got up, took the knife away from my stomach, and walked away, like it was nothing, like what she did to me wasn't something that would ruin me for the rest of my life. In the days that followed, I barely left my room. I cried myself to sleep every night and didn't even know if I wanted to live anymore. I didn't want to tell anyone because I knew that they wouldn't believe me. I heard about it all the time. A man saying that he had been victimized by a woman, and people would laugh and ask why he didn't just fight back or not believe him at all. I didn't want that to happen to me. I didn't want to seem weak, and I just kept everything in. I lost all relationships with friends and family. I just stopped talking altogether for some time, and I wanted nothing more than to just tell someone about what happened, but I couldn't think of anyone to tell that would listen to me and not judge me. When I was 25 and alone, I met an amazing woman named Kate. She made me feel like I wasn't on my own anymore, like there was finally a person in my life I could tell anything to, and she would listen and be there for me without any judgment at all. We were together 2 years before I told her what happened to me. She listened and said nothing as I spoke. When I was finished telling her what happened, I was a mess. I was sobbing and in the most vulnerable state of my life, and she just held me and told me no matter what that she was there for me. For the next month, we talked about it only when I wanted to and discussed my options for getting help. In the beginning, I wasn't sure about going to the police, but she helped me realize that in doing so, I could probably save other people from my fate. I filed a report, but I didn't have hope. I mostly did it for myself as a form of getting some closure. I had to be sure that it wasn't going to control my life anymore. And over the 2 years following the police report, I rekindled my relationship with my father, who was overjoyed to hear from me. Unfortunately, they never found the people living inside that Mexican restaurant or that woman. I didn't have my hopes up, but of course a part of me wanted her to pay for the damage that she'd done to me. It was 3 years ago when Kate and I got married. We have a 2-year-old daughter now, and life honestly couldn't be better. I don't think about what happened much anymore, but I felt this story was something that I needed to tell. I need other men to know that if you've been through the same thing or something similar, you're not alone, and even though I'm just one man, one person, I believe you. If you enjoyed this scary story, listen to thousands more, either over on the Let's Read YouTube channel or podcast.